Nice spot you've got here, peaceful.
It's my thinking bench. Not a lot of distractions unless you count the pigeons.
Pigeons do tend to demand attention. So I'm going around asking folks one question. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Just one. That's tough. I guess I'd say stop judging everyone, including yourself.
Interesting. Why that?
Because I spent too many years thinking I had people and myself all figured out. Turns out I was wrong more often than I'd care to admit.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, plenty. Let's see. There was this guy I worked with in my 30s, Bill. Quiet, didn't talk much, never joined in when we joked around. I thought, what a stuck-up guy. Thinks he's too good for us. Told my wife about him, too. Bill's the office snob. Then one day he invites me over for dinner. Out of nowhere. Turns out Bill wasn't stuck up. He was shy. Real shy. His wife told me later he thought we were too smart for him. Imagine that.
That must have changed how you saw him.
Oh, it knocked me down a peg, that's for sure. After that, I started catching myself. I'd think, do I really know what's going on with this person? Or am I just making up a story? 9 times out of 10, it's the latter.
What about judging yourself? You mentioned that too.
Yeah, that's the other half of it. I used to beat myself up over everything. Mistakes, missed opportunities, you name it. If I messed up, I'd replay it in my head for weeks. But here's the thing. Most people don't even notice the stuff you're worried about. You're out there carrying this big old bag of regret, and nobody else even knows you're holding it.
So how did you get past that?
Trial and error, I guess. Took a lot of years. You start asking yourself, would I talk to a friend like this? If the answer's no, then why talk to yourself that way? Life's hard enough without being your own worst critic.
That's solid advice. Was there a turning point for you, or did it happen gradually?
Probably a bit of both. But I'll tell you this, getting older helps. You stop caring so much about what people think. And when you stop caring about their opinions, you realize they're probably not judging you as hard as you think.
So, if you could sum it all up for your younger self in one line, what would you say?
I'd say, Arcade, you don't know everything, and you don't have to. The world's messy, people are messy, you're messy. Stop trying to sort it all out. Just live and let live.
That's great. Do you think your younger self would have listened?
Oh, no way. He'd have rolled his eyes and gone back to thinking he was the smartest guy in the room. Took me a lifetime to figure this out. But hey, better late than never.
Better late than never indeed. Thanks for sharing that.
Anytime. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think that pigeon over there's giving me the side eye.
Oh, no judgment from me. Excuse me, ma'am. Mind if I interrupt your walk for a moment?
As long as Daisy here doesn't mind.
She looks like she runs the show.
Oh, absolutely. She keeps me on my toes. What can I do for you?
I'm talking to people about life advice. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about love, what would you say?
Love? That's a big one. I'd tell myself that love isn't all fireworks and grand gestures, it's care. Plain and simple.
Care, could you elaborate on that?
Well, I learned that the hard way. My first husband, bless him, thought love was all about doing big, flashy things, expensive dates, fancy gifts. I thought so too, but when I really needed him during the tough times, he didn't know how to be there for me.
What kind of tough times? If you don't mind me asking.
When my mother passed away, I was a wreck. I needed someone to hold me, to just sit with me while I cried. But he was uncomfortable with emotions. He'd disappear into work or come home with a bouquet of flowers, thinking that was enough. It wasn't.
That sounds lonely.
It was after we divorced. I spent a long time thinking I'd never find love again. But then I met my second husband, George. He didn't do flashy things. He didn't have the money for it anyway. But he'd do little things like bring me tea when I was tired or listen to me ramble about my day. He cared in all the ways that mattered.
That must have been a big change for you.
Oh, it was. George taught me that love isn't about showing off. It's about showing up. It's in the small, everyday acts of care. When he got sick, I cared for him the same way he always did for me. And even after he's gone, that kind of love stays with you.
That's beautiful, Margaret. If you had to sum it up, what would you say love really is?
Of his care. It's the little things you do to make someone feel safe, seen, and cherished. And it lasts long after the person is gone.
That's incredible advice. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for asking. Now, if you'll excuse me, Daisy's giving me that. It's time for a treat.
Love isn't just about romance or grand gestures. It's in the small, thoughtful acts of care that make someone feel valued. Love equals care. Never underestimate the power of showing up for someone. Thanks for letting me visit, Mr. Harold. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't sweat the stuff you can't take with you.
What do you mean by that?
Money, fancy car, much time chasing things. Money, fancy cars, a bigger house, I thought they'd make me happy. But when my wife Claire was dying, none of that mattered. She didn't care about the car in the driveway or the size of our house. She just wanted to talk about the moments we shared, the people we loved.
That must have been a hard realization.
It was after she passed, I looked at all the things I'd worked so hard for and thought, why? None of it could fill the space she left behind. What stayed with me were the memories, her laugh, the trips we took, the love we built.
What would you tell someone still focused on material things?
Look around, who's with you, what makes you laugh? That's what counts. Stuff can be replaced, but people can't.
So, your advice is?
Don't sweat the stuff you can't take with you. Focus on what lasts, love, connection, and memories.
What you leave behind isn't in storage units or bank accounts. It's in the hearts of those who loved you. Morning, sir. You seem to be in great shape for 80. Morning. I try to keep moving.
That's half the battle when you get to my age.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Save now. You'll thank yourself later.
Financially, you mean?
Exactly. When I was younger, I spent money like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Fancy clothes, nights out, gadgets I didn't need. And I thought, retirement, that's decades away. But let me tell you, those decades fly by.
Did you have a moment that changed your outlook?
Oh, yeah. My company downsized when I was 55. Suddenly, I didn't have a paycheck, and I realized how unprepared I was. If it weren't for my wife's savings habits, I'd have been in big trouble.
What would you say to younger folks who think they have time?
Start now, even if it's just a little. Compound interest is magic. It turns nickels into dollars if you give it time. And don't just save for emergencies. Save for freedom. The freedom to enjoy life without worrying about every penny.
So, your advice is?
Save now, thank yourself later. It's a gift to your future self. And trust me, old you will be grateful.
Thanks, Mr. Ray.
Anytime. Now, if you'll excuse me, these legs aren't going to stretch themselves.
A little saving today can mean a lot of freedom tomorrow. Start now, you'll be glad you did. Good afternoon, Mr. Sam. You've got quite a knack for keeping your yard in shape.
Afternoon. Well, you've got to keep busy, don't you? Keeps the mind sharp and the heart light.
That's great advice already. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I'd tell myself life's too short for bitterness. I spent too much time holding grudges.
What made you realize that?
There was a man I worked with, my 40 years old, named Mark. He took credit for one of my big ideas. I was furious and I carried that anger for years. Every time his name came up, I'd get worked up all over again. But you know what? Mark retired and moved away. And here I was, still stuck on something that didn't matter anymore.
How did you let it go?
It wasn't easy. One day my daughter told me, "Dad, he's not thinking about you. Why are you giving him space in your mind?" She was right. Bitterness is like carrying a sack of rocks. It doesn't hurt anyone but you.
What's your advice for someone struggling with bitterness now?
Forgive, even if it's just for your own peace. You don't have to forget, but don't let it weigh you down. Life's too short to waste on anger.
So your message is?
Life's too short for bitterness. Spend your time loving, not stewing. You'll be much happier for it.
Holding on to bitterness steals your joy. Forgive, let go, and focus on what brings you peace. Life's too short for anything else.